Not good afternoon. Good evening, Dr. Kwame. Um, I'm testing out some new software here I'm not familiar with. So this is the only way I can get it to act right. So please, please, please bear with me on my possible stuttering or having to take a quick pause to look at my notes I have over here. So my topic was effectiveness of sex offender programs. And the reason why I picked this topic um, is because sex offenders have always intrigued me in the criminal justice system. I've grown up watching the criminal justice shows, Law and Order, Special Victims Unit, and To Catch a Predator on NBC, and CSI, where they had those cases of sex offenders um, in those dramatic cases and preying on children. Um, but let's get into the meat here. And sex offenders are unique criminals. Um, a lot of the research I've done, uh, people will say that these people need special management, and they're very hard to rehabilitate. And can we even rehabilitate these people? And we're going to get into that, and I'm going to show you that yes, we can rehabilitate sex offenders. Excuse me here. And what is a sex crime? A sex crime is illegal conduct um, committed against another individual, and it includes indecent exposure, sexual assault, prostitution, solicitation, rape, and statutory rape. And the reason why these crimes are weighted so heavily in society, and why people look down on these kind of crimes so harshly, is because of the impact it has on the victims. When you hear about children getting molested or children getting molested and killed, people are disgusted. There's a big uproar. Like, people want that guy to rot in prison and stuff like that. And I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Um, oh, but what happens is when these crimes get, or when these acts get committed upon people, it affects them for the rest of their lives. That's why it's weighted so heavily. And it has an impact on the victim, the community. When that child or when that person, when they have to live out the rest of their life knowing that, hey, I had this crime committed against me and there was nothing I could do about it, it messes up the thinking process. I've met people, I have some close friends that have had these things happen to them, and it really messes with their thinking. It really messes with their relationships and how they communicate with people. This is not just a crime that's just like, okay, well, we're just going to send them to jail, everything's fine. No, these people have to go get, therapy and everything else to get over what happened to them. And each state uses its own interpretation of of a sex crime. And what we're going to focus on in this presentation is child sex offenders, because I feel like, well, now I feel like people look down on child sex offenders and just want to label them, they're crazy, they have a mental illness, and all those sorts of things. And yes, some of these people do have mental health issues, but it's just a number of things that causes them to do what they do, and we're going to look into those things. And so the goals of sex offender programs is to intervene. When these people get admitted into a prison or some type of hospital or something, that these programs want to intervene and try to change these people's behavior. And how they do this is they assess the risks. So they might administer a test and see what how they think and how they problem solve and how they handle themselves in certain situations to see what kind of treatment they want to give these people. And another thing is they look at their past, because most of the time in criminal behavior, what they've done in the past is pretty predictable what they're going to do in the future. And so if you can correct that behavior that they've done in the past, you can theoretically correct the their future actions, and that goes into rehabilitation. And rehabilitation is is correcting somebody's behavior to where they don't keep doing the same thing. They don't reoffend and cause recidivism rates to go up, because that's what we want. We want recidivism rates to go down, and that's the goal of sex offender programs. And so I did a lot of research on different programs, and after looking at all the different programs, it kind of led me back to Kia Merima. It seems like this is where it all started on the success range of things. And Kia Merima means "Let There Be Light," and it was founded in 1989 by Steve Hudson and Bill Marshall. And this method of treatment started in New Zealand and in a Ralston prison, and it was modeled to treat sex offenders. And it can be, we're gonna get into this later, but it can be modified to treat other types of offenders. Let's go down here. And how Kia Merima works is it's utilized in the last 8 to 9 months of that offender's sentence, and it lasted for 31 weeks, and the men would meet 3 times. They would meet for 2.5 hours 3 times a week, and the framework, it involved a therapeutic community model. And what the therapeutic community model is, it's almost like just like you see in the movies. Or what I imagine is they sit in a circle and they're having a group chat and they're talking about their problems, and they're making themselves very vulnerable to the therapist. And here we're going to go into the meat of that. And Kia Merima takes the men through 7 steps. And the first step is norm building, which sets the foundation. Norm building is where the men, they give their background, what was their family structure, any relationships that they might have problems with, they might have changed their life totally, and in their social history. And so they let the therapist know, this is who I am. They let the other men know this is who I am, because that's how you build a relationship. And ultimately, that's what this program does. It teaches them how to build a relationship and talk out their problems and not hold it in. And the next step is understanding you're offending. There's a typo there. It's understanding you're offending. And what happens is the therapist goes down through their offense chain. They read through past prison reports, probation reports, pre-sentence files, summary of facts, judicial sentencing, all those things, so they can understand the past of each participant in the program. Because there's not a one style fits all for every participant in these sex offender programs. These people need to be talked to differently, because people learn differently. People cope with things differently. So knowing this person's past and the path they went through the criminal justice system with their problems is very important for the therapist. And it allows that therapist to communicate with each participant in the most effective way. And it goes into the next step of arousal conditioning. And this module assists the participants on how they should respond to their possible lapses in the future. So this is you can relate this to any other program like alcohol and drugs. Is that how will they handle themselves if they got in a situation of there's kids around, they're at a park near a school, and they're sitting in the park, and there's a bunch of vulnerable kids running around that'll probably talk to them for however long. Will they be able to control their fetish that arouses them? Because I think them liking children is a fetish, and they're acting upon it. How will they go about correcting themselves? How will they talk themselves out of, hey, I need to calm myself down? And it just teaches them how to talk themselves. It's just kind of like, okay, I need to take this step. If I can't cope with it, I need to call somebody. And the next step they go through is victim impact and empathy. And I think this is one of the most important parts um, next to norm building in the process, because this allows them to put themselves in um, in the victim's shoes, or in their victim's shoes. Um, for example, didn't put this in my paper, but I was talking to uh, Jerry Jones, the campaign manager here in Nacogdoches. I was talking to Jerry Jones because she's involved with a prison. I want to say in Jacksonville or Henderson, somewhere in that area, where these men go through a type of program like this, and it's a sexual offending program. And this lady that runs the program talks about how rape has changed her life. The lady that runs the program, um, these men broke into her house and killed her husband and raped her. But she tells a story as she's talking about somebody else. Excuse me. And these men are getting really invested, and they're just like, wow, this is taking an impact. And at the end of the story, she tells them that is her. And Jerry said that crushes them to no end to know that. And it's just putting the inmates or the participants in the victim's shoes, and it makes them empathize with the victim. Like, man, what I'm doing is really affecting people. I can't just carry out my actions and expect and not to be selfish. It teaches them not to be selfish. So I can't just carry out these actions and not to worry about the victim. This affects the victim, the victim's family, the victim's community, churches, wherever they go. There's going to be some negative effects behind it. And it just really gets down to the root of that. It's done by brainstorming, immediate effects, post-abuse effects, long-term consequences, and gaps in understanding. And that's filled by the therapist talking them through it and helping them put two and two together. They might go down a path and it's like, well, see, this right here made them feel depression and everything else. And so it's just connecting the dots in the offender's brains. And the next step is mood management. And mood management involves educating the men on how to control their feelings through a cognitive behavior model that aims to challenge or interrupt negative thinking. So it wants to keep them positive throughout this whole program. Because once you become negative, that's when you start to become on decline and the treatment stops working. So the therapist takes steps in to try to interrupt the person's thinking, and maybe if it's getting too negative, they stop and take a break. And okay, let's take a minute here, walk around, take a breather, go out, do what you need to do, or we can stop and do this tomorrow. I'm gonna let you sleep on it. And another way is there's behavioral techniques, including teaching and role playing. There are effective ways of communicating emotion. And the main deal is anger management. So they might act out a scenario and teach them how to, okay, when you're in this position, this is how you should not act on your anger. This is how you should handle your anger situation. So it's just basically anger management in this step. And then relationship skills, that's another step, the next step that really stuck out to me, because these men do what they do because they possibly don't know how to build a relationship with a child or a woman, whoever they affected. But the unit believes the difficulty offenders have establishing emotionally satisfying relationships with other adults is that major factor in offending. So what Kiyomura is saying is that they have a problem building relationships, and that's why they're doing what they're doing. And relapse prevention, and that goes back to arousal conditioning. So this keeps them from going back to their old ways to kind of teach them, hey, you need to talk to yourself constantly. Like, I don't need to do this. And there was two steps. There were two sub points to this, and that's internal management and external management. And the internal management puts emphasis on the man presenting an understanding of his new behavioral skills. It's like, okay, well, show us that you have taken in the information and you know how to your behavior is altered. And external management asks the man to identify uh, family and friends that are prepared to help him. So this is one of my biggest things that I bring up to people when I'm talking about recidivism is that these people go out into these communities and they might go out into the same community that they came from, and they're going to live their life there, and most of the time they end up back in prison. So it's good to find those accountability partners or friends, like reaching out to those people and it's like, hey, do you have any friends that can keep an eye on you and help you stay on the right track? And if you don't, we need to figure out something to keep you on the right track. We need to hire somebody to, monitor you for a few months and see how you're doing or what. But you need to have somebody in the community that you live in to help you stay on the right path until you feel like you're ultimately cured. And those are the 7 steps. Let's go to the next slide here. And so after researching some things, because I ultimately talked about the Federal Bureau of Prisons and Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and the reason why I stayed in the Federal Bureau of Prisons and Texas Department of Criminal Justice, because those are places that I'm interested in working one of these days. So, in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, they take a 2-pronged approach, and they have the non-residential. I'm gonna get down to my notes here real quick. They have a non-residential program and a residential program. The non-residential program involves low to moderate offenders. And the program lasts for 36 months. It's a whole lot longer. It's a whole lot longer than the the Marima treatment. And once those people are released, they're monitored for about 9 months. And the admission is completely voluntary. And these people are low risk, so they might have 1 sex crime, 1 or 2 sex crimes, and depending on the severity too. So, and it goes after the same model as Kia Mary. It uses a therapeutic community model, and it looks at the dynamic risk factors, like we talked about earlier, assessing those factors and asking questions before and asking those questions after to see if those behaviors have changed. And the second part of the Federal Bureau of Prisons is the residential. This is your high-risk offenders. These are the guys that the people talk about in the community every day. Oh, these guys can't change. They probably did some bad stuff. And not only do they get a therapeutic community model, it might be modified in some ways. And it's based on psychotherapy. And it totals about 10 to 12 hours. Yeah, that's it for that one. Sorry for that. I wish I could cut this out. But and the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, it has 2-pronged approach too, and it's based on the Kia Marima treatment. So, but I think Texas Department of Criminal Justice takes a little milder approach. Texas Department of Criminal Justice takes a lighter approach to their criminals. They're more about death penalty and stuff like that. But the first approach they take is the sex offender education program. That's a soft title in itself. When I see sex offender education program, that means that they're sitting these people in the classroom and they're teaching them about different behaviors that they might not be educated on, and teaching them just how to just be better people, be a better person. Because it's just a 4-month curriculum. So these people are they might have committed a sex crime, but in the eyes of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, they're not that big of a threat. So, oh, golly, I'm going down too far. Going down too far. And the second part of this is the sex offender treatment program, and this basically to the T models Kia Marima um, treatment. And as you can see so far, um, people are getting on board with the Kia Marima model because it works, and that because it involves high risk offenders. It's a therapeutic community model, and it lasts 18 months. It's intensive, but it's 18 months. Um, one of my this is probably one of my favorite topics in this research because um, people just automatically want to label sex offenders with a mental health issue. I'm going to say I believe in this one, but I believe that, well, no, sex offenders, they have a fetish. And they're acting on that fetish and um, they're allowing that to take over their cognitive abilities. And offenders with developmental disabilities, they need more time and effort and adapting, and programs need to be able to adapt the assessment and treatment methods, simplify language without losing integrity of treatment, and make sure everyone is grasping the material. Basically, what this is saying is spend more time with people that have developmental disabilities. Sorry, I got tongue twisted, Dr. Kwame. And in the Baker, one guy, Lindsay, William R. Lindsay, he was talking about how to deal with people with mental health issues. And what he saying is therapists need to spend more time with the participants and so that they can learn, because what happens is people with mental issues, they can fake like they're getting along. I have a couple cousins that have mental health issues, and they can play along like they're learning and they're grasping everything, but in all actuality they're not. And so what the therapist needs to do is when they're teaching material, they need to go around and ask, like, so what did you take away from the material? What did you grasp from the material? Because then that forces them to actually say what they're taking away from the treatment. And if they're not really grasping onto what's going on, then something's wrong. You need to kind of spend some more time. And and William R. Lindsay said that was a downfall of spending time with mental health offenders. But the whole goal is to get these people back in society where they don't do those things. So it's better if you just take the time and make sure everybody's getting the material, because at the end of the day, why not try to strive to have 100% 0% recidivism, So that was kind of a tongue twister. I got distracted. So and this is another thing, and this goes back to what I said in the beginning about the public perception of sex offenders. With all the media, technology we have today, and exposure, people have access to sex offender information like no other. Because you have people that now we make people register if they do have a sex crime. And then you have people that actually believe in these shows like Law and Order Special Victims Unit. You can't tell me that people aren't out there. It's like, well, I bet you he's creepy because he's a sex offender. That guy looks like a sex offender because he looks like the guy on Law and Order. And so these shows do have an effect on how society looks at sex offenders. And I posted this chart because the last 4 questions are very eye-opening. And as you can see, it says, what percent of adult sex offenders do you believe were sexually abused as children? And You can look over here. It says the public average says 67%. And they even asked the offenders, and the offenders said 54%, and the published data that's out there with the common average is 28%. So that lets you know right there that the public is like, oh, this, has their stereotypes. And the second question, second question is, what percent of convicted sex offenders do you believe will commit another sexual offense? The public average, 74%. Right there, 74%. Offender mean, 21%. Published data, 14%. That was very astonishing to me. Next question, what percent of rapists do you believe reoffend in a sexual manner? Public mean, 74%. Offenders, 34%. Published data, 20%. What percent of child molesters do you believe reoffend in a sexual manner? 76% public, 27% offender, and published data says 13%. So these shows and the media, social media, they have an effect on how we look at sex offenders, because I catch myself judging people like, oh, he looks like a sex offender, he's probably weird, and he probably never even, goes that way. But that's just how we are in society. And do sex offender programs work? Yes, they work. Look at the published data that I just put. They do work. I did a lot of research and I found a lot of information. I pretty much had information overload on this topic, and it was hard for me to figure out which way I wanted to go with it. But a lot of researchers have a lot of different opinions. I don't think researchers are going to ever agree on data because of just how controversial this topic is, and recidivism rates aren't accurate. One day they're 14%. You can go look at another article. It's 20%. It's down 20%, up 16%. The recidivism rates are all over the place in these studies. Not a national recidivism rate. Each study has their own recidivism rate. And the most consistent results have come from the Kia-Mara models. And like I said earlier, this can be used for other types of offenders, because this really addresses people's problems. This really makes people become vulnerable and express their the backgrounds, and this just addresses everything that's wrong with that person. So I think it can be very beneficial to any type of offender, and it's cost effective. I have a note here that the federal hold on now, hold on, I'm running out of time here. But the prison system saved $3 million just by utilizing the Kia-Mara treatment, because just think about it. If you can effectively keep offenders out of prison, that's less tax dollars they're spending, that's less money the prisons are spending, and they can spend that on upgrading facilities and improving their programs and just keep making it better. So the Kia-Mara approach is cost effective. And it's continuing to show results. I don't have my notes pulled up, but I'm running out of time. But this is my presentation. I'm sorry that it really went a long time and I stuttered a lot. Once again, I'm using new software that's not going to allow me to cut it and make it smooth. Sorry about that, Dr. Kwame. But hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I will see you around. Thank you.